Close your eyes and take a deep breath. The day is done and the world can wait. Welcome to Z in History. Think about how easy it is to make a bowl of hot soup right now. You walk into your kitchen, turn a little knob on the stove, and a perfect circle of blue fire pops up. You grab a smooth metal pot from the cupboard, fill it with water from the sink, and drop your food in. In 10 minutes, you have a soft, warm meal. We don't even think about the pot. It's just a piece of metal or ceramic that holds water. But try to imagine a world where the cooking pot doesn't exist. Imagine living in a freezing landscape where your only way to cook a piece of meat or a tough, wild root is to literally throw it directly into a pile of burning wood. It burns the outside to a crisp, leaves the inside rock hard, and coats every single bite in bitter, gritty, grey ash. That was reality for every single human being on Earth for hundreds of thousands of years. Tonight, we are going back 20,000 years. We are traveling to the middle of the last ice age, to a massive, freezing limestone cave in what is now Jiangxi, China. We are going to follow a quiet, exhausted guy named Li. He is just trying to keep his aging mother fed during a brutal winter. And we are going to sit by the fire with him as he makes a messy, frustrating mistake with a handful of river mud, a mistake that accidentally creates the very first piece of pottery in human history and completely changes how we survive the cold. Let's step into the quiet of the cave. Chapter 1. Waking up in the Ice Age. It is the absolute dead of winter, and the wind outside the cave is howling. When I say cave, don't picture a tiny little hole in the rock. This is a massive, sprawling limestone cavern. It is big enough to fit an entire tribe of people, which is exactly what is happening. 20,000 years ago, you didn't have a house or a bedroom. You had the tribe, and you had the fire. Li wakes up on the hard stone floor. He is buried under a heavy pile of thick animal furs. The furs are sewn together using thin pieces of bone for needles and dried animal sinew for thread. It is incredibly heavy, scratchy, and it smells intensely like wild earth and old wood smoke. But it keeps him alive. He opens his eyes, and the very first thing he looks for is the communal fire in the center of the cavern. In the Ice Age, the fire is everything. It is the only thing keeping the freezing wind from killing them in their sleep. And it is the only thing keeping the wild animals away from the entrance of the cave. The fire never, ever goes out. Someone is always awake, feeding it dry branches and thick logs. Li pushes the heavy furs off his shoulders and sits up. The cold air hits him instantly, biting at his face and his hands. He pulls a thick leather tunic tighter around his chest. He is exhausted. For Li and everyone else in the tribe, survival is a full-time, back-breaking job. There are no weekends. There are no grocery stores. Every single day, you wake up, you go out into the freezing wilderness, and you try to find enough calories to make it to the next morning. He looks over at the pile of furs next to him. His aging mother is sitting up, rubbing her cold hands together near the edge of the fire pit. She looks incredibly frail. The winter has been hard on her, but the hardest part is the food. Li watches as someone from the tribe pulls their breakfast out of the fire. It is a thick, wild tuber-like, a really tough, stringy potato. To cook it, they just threw it directly into the red-hot coals an hour ago. The person uses a long stick to roll it out of the fire. The outside is completely charred black, turned into a hard crust of burnt carbon, and the whole thing is covered in a thick layer of grey ash. They break a piece off and hand it to Lee's mother. She takes it with shaking hands and tries to take a bite. It is awful. Her teeth are worn down, which happens to almost everyone back then because there is so much grit and dirt in their food. She tries to chew the rock-hard, ash-covered root, but she just can't do it. She gives up, setting the piece of food down on a flat stone, looking tired and hungry. Lee sits there in the dim, smoky light of the cave, watching her. He feels a heavy, tight knot of worry in his stomach. He knows she needs the energy from that food to survive the freezing months ahead. He wishes, more than anything, that there was a way to make the food soft and warm without burning it to a crisp in the ashes. But as far as he knows, water puts out fire. You can't put a woven grass basket or a leather pouch full of water into the flames to boil it. It is just a law of the world. Fire burns, water runs, and food is hard. He takes a deep breath, wraps his feet in thick strips of hide to protect them from the ice, and stands up. He has to go out into the freezing river valley today to gather more seeds and grains, hoping he can find something, anything, soft enough for her to eat. Chapter 2. The Ash-Covered Breakfast. We have to understand how brutal eating was before cooking pots existed. Everything you ate tasted like a campfire. If you caught an animal or dug up some wild roots, the only real way to cook it was to toss it straight into the hot embers. It seems simple, right? But the reality is that the outside burns into an inedible layer of charcoal, while the inside might stay raw and tough, and every single bite you take is coated in fine, gritty ash that grinds down your teeth over the years. Dotley watches his mother chew slowly, her face tight with effort. The root is incredibly fibrous, like trying to eat raw wood. She works at it for a few minutes, swallows a tiny piece, and then gives up entirely. She sets the rest of her breakfast down on a flat stone near the fire and wraps her arms around herself, shivering in the cold, damp air of the cave. She is simply too tired, and the food is too hard. Seeing this breaks Lee's heart, but there is no time to sit and worry. In the Ice Age, worry doesn't feed you. Action feeds you. If the tough roots won't work, he has to go find something softer, tiny wild seeds, grains, anything that requires less chewing. The problem is, it's the middle of winter. The ground is frozen solid. Most of the plants are dead. The only place to find anything edible is down by the riverbank, where the moving water keeps the ground slightly softer and the wild grasses still hold on to their seeds. He knows it is going to be a long, exhausting day. He grabs his gathering basket. It's a simple thing, woven entirely by hand out of dried river reeds and tough wild grass. It took him hours to make it, carefully weaving the strands over and under each other. It's light, but it's the only way to carry anything. He steps out of the massive cave opening and into the grey, freezing light of the Ice Age morning. The wind instantly cuts through his thick animal hide tunic. The landscape is barren, rocky, and covered in patches of hard ice. He lowers his head against the wind and begins the long, difficult walk down toward the valley floor, his breath puffing out in white clouds in front of his face. He is just a guy going to work, but his work is keeping his family alive, Chapter 3. The freezing forage. The walk to the river takes hours. There are no paved paths, just slippery, freezing rocks and frozen mud. When Lee finally reaches the riverbank, the water is slow, dark, and partially frozen at the edges. The wind blowing off the water is incredibly sharp, stinging his face and making his eyes water. He crouches down by the edge of the water and begins to work. He is looking for wild rice, grasses, and specific tiny seeds that survive in the cold. It is incredibly tedious, meticulous work. You don't just harvest a field with a machine. You have to comb through the frozen, dead grass with your bare hands, looking for tiny flecks of food. His fingers are completely numb. The dried reeds are sharp, and they slice small stinging cuts into his skin. He ignores the pain. He methodically picks the seeds, one by one, dropping them into his woven grass basket. Think about how much patience that takes. A single handful of these seeds might have 20 calories. He needs thousands of them just to give his mother a decent meal. He works for hours, shuffling along the freezing, muddy riverbank. The sun is hidden behind thick gray clouds, so the temperature never really rises. His back aches from being hunched over. His knees are soaked with freezing, muddy water. But slowly, very slowly, his woven basket begins to fill up with the tiny, precious seeds. It is a quiet, lonely struggle. There is no one else around. Just Lee, the wind, and the slow, dark river. He is completely focused on the task, driven by the image of his mother giving up on her breakfast that morning. He refuses to go back to the cave empty-handed. He pushes through the cold, picking seed after seed until his basket is nearly half full. He stands up, stretching his aching back, and decides it is enough for today. He needs to get back before the sun goes down completely. Because the Ice Age night is deadly. Chapter 4. The frustrating harvest. Lee turns away from the river and begins the slow, steep climb back up the rocky hill toward the cave. He is holding his woven basket carefully with both freezing hands. But as he walks, he notices a problem. A very annoying, very frustrating problem. The basket is made of dried, woven grass. When you weave grass, there are always tiny gaps and holes between the strands. It's fine if you are carrying large roots or pieces of meat, but Lee is carrying tiny, hard-earned seeds. And as the basket shifts and bounces with every step, he takes up the rocky path. The tiny seeds start slipping through the cracks. He stops and looks down. A steady, thin trickle of precious seeds is falling out of the bottom of his basket, landing in the frozen mud of the path. He has just spent 6 hours freezing his hands off to gather this food, and his own tool is literally dropping it on the ground. It is maddening. You know that feeling when you are already exhausted, and one tiny thing goes wrong, and it just makes you want to throw everything on the floor. That is exactly how Lee feels. He tries to adjust his grip, trying to pinch the bottom of the basket closed with his numb fingers, but it doesn't work. The dry grass just shifts, and more seeds fall out. He is losing the food his mother needs. He can't just weave a tighter basket right now. That takes days, and he doesn't have the materials or the energy. He has to fix this problem right here, right now, or the entire day of freezing labor was for nothing. He stands on the icy path, looking back down at the dark, slow-moving river, trying to think of a solution. He needs something to plug the holes. Something thick, something that will fill the gaps in the dry grass. He looks at the wet, grey mud on his own boots, and he gets an idea. Chapter 5. The Messy Fix. It isn't a brilliant, world-changing stroke of genius. It is just a messy, desperate fix from a guy who is tired of losing his food. Lee turns around and walks all the way back down the steep, icy hill to the river bank. He sets his leaking basket down carefully on a flat rock. He wades into the freezing shallows of the river. The water is so cold it feels like it is burning his skin, but he ignores it. He reaches his hands deep into the thick, grey clay bank just under the surface of the water. He digs his fingers in and pulls out a massive, heavy, dripping lump of wet river mud. He carries the heavy, grey clay back to his basket. He dumps the seeds out onto the flat rock for a moment. Then he takes the wet clay and just starts smearing it all over the inside of the woven grass basket. It is incredibly messy. We can hear the thick, wet, slapping sound of the cold mud hitting the dry reeds. He uses his thumbs to push the sticky clay deep into the cracks and corners, smoothing it out as best he can. He covers the entire inside of the basket with a thick layer of grey mud, completely sealing every single tiny hole. His hands are caked in freezing, wet clay. His tunic is splashed with grey mud, but it works. The inside of the basket is now a smooth, continuous surface of wet earth. He scoops the tiny seeds off the flat rock and dumps them back into the mud-lined basket. Not a single seed falls through. Lee lets out a deep, tired breath. He wipes his muddy, freezing hands on his leather tunic. The problem is solved. The food is safe. He picks the basket back up, but as soon as he lifts it, he realizes the consequence of his messy fix. The dry grass basket used to weigh almost nothing. Now, coated in a thick layer of wet, heavy river clay, it weighs 5 times as much. It is like carrying a solid rock. Chapter 6. The Heavy Walk Home. The walk back to the cave is brutal. The sun is starting to set, turning the grey sky into a bruised purple. The temperature, which was already freezing, plummets. Lee is shivering violently. His hands, gripping the heavy, mud-lined basket, are completely numb. The wet clay is freezing to his fingers. Every step up the steep, rocky hill is a massive physical effort. His boots slip on the icy path. His shoulders burn from the weight of the heavy mud. He has to stop every few minutes just to catch his breath, the icy air stinging his lungs. But he keeps going. He thinks about his mother, sitting by the fire, unable to eat the tough roots. He looks at the seeds safe inside the heavy mud basket, and he forces himself to take another step. By the time he finally sees the warm, orange glow of the cave entrance in the distance, it is completely dark outside. He is exhausted to his absolute core. He walks through the massive cave opening, out of the howling wind, and into the smoky, warm air of the cavern. The tribe is gathered around the roaring central fire. The smell of wood smoke and roasting meat fills the air. Lee doesn't say a word. He walks straight to his family's spot near the fire, sets the incredibly heavy, wet, muddy basket down on the stone floor, and just collapses onto his pile of animal furs. He is too tired to even eat. He just lies there, feeling the warmth of the fire slowly thaw his freezing bones. Chapter 7. Drying by the fire, The evening routine in the cave continues around him. The low hum of voices, the sharp clack of someone chipping a new flint knife, the crackle of the massive bonfire. Lee watches the flames for a while, letting his mind go blank. He looks over at his heavy mud-lined basket sitting on the stone floor. It did its job, but the thick grey clay is still completely wet and soft. If he leaves it like that, the mud will eventually just wash away or crumble when it dries unevenly in the cold air of the cave. He wants to keep using it to carry seeds, which means he needs the mud to dry out and harden properly. He sits up, his muscles aching with every movement. He grabs the heavy basket and drags it across the stone floor. He pushes it right up close to the edge of the central fire pit, not in the flames, but close enough to the deep, glowing red coals that he can feel the intense heat radiating off them. He figures the heat of the fire will bake the wet mud over the next few hours, drying it out completely by the time he wakes up in the morning. He checks on his mother. She is asleep under her thick furs, looking peaceful but incredibly frail. He hopes that tomorrow, with the seeds he brought back, he can figure out a way to mash them into something soft enough for her to eat. Lee crawls back under his own heavy animal furs. The warmth of the fire, the sheer physical exhaustion of the day, and the hypnotic crackle of the burning wood pull him down instantly. He closes his eyes and falls into a deep, dreamless sleep, totally unaware of the incredibly dangerous position he just left his basket in. Chapter 8. The accident in the dark. It is the middle of the night. The cave is almost entirely silent, except for the deep, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping tribe and the low, soft hiss of the dying fire. The massive bonfire from the evening has burned down to a huge bed of incredibly hot, glowing red coals in the Ice Age. Keeping the fire alive is the single most important rule of survival. Someone is always tasked with staying awake to tend it. Tonight, it is an older hunter from the tribe. He is sitting wrapped in furs, fighting off sleep. He sees that the coals are getting too low and the chill of the cave is starting to creep back in. He stands up, grabs a massive, heavy wooden log from the dry pile and walks over to the fire pit. He is tired, clumsy, and the cave is very dark. He heaves the heavy log onto the glowing red coals. As the log crashes down, it shifts the rocks around the edge of the fire pit. It bumps directly into Lee's mud-lined basket, which was sitting just inches away. The heavy basket tips over. It rolls off the flat stone and falls directly into the deepest, hottest part of the glowing red coals. The hunter doesn't notice. He just watches the new log catch fire, turns around, and goes back to his spot. Down in the massive bed of embers, the heat is unimaginable. It is hundreds of degrees, glowing with a fierce, silent intensity. The dry, woven river grass on the outside of Lee's basket instantly catches fire. It doesn't even smoke. It just flashes into bright orange flame and burns away in seconds. The grass is completely destroyed, turned to white ash, but the thick layer of wet river mud on the inside of the basket doesn't burn. Instead, surrounded by the intense, suffocating heat of the red coals, it begins to bake. The water inside the clay boils and evaporates instantly. The microscopic particles of the mud begin to fuse together. It is a slow, silent, invisible chemical reaction happening in the dead of night. Buried in the ashes of a campfire. Chapter 9. The morning discovery. The grey light of morning slowly filters into the massive cave. The howling wind outside has died down to a dull roar. Lee wakes up. He is stiff and sore from the freezing trek the day before. He rubs his eyes, pushes the heavy furs off his chest, and sits up. He looks immediately toward the fire pit to check on his basket. He wants to see if the mud has dried out so he can go back to the river. He stares at the edge of the fire pit. The flat stone where he left his basket is completely empty. He frowns, confused. He stands up and walks over to the fire. The large bonfire from the night before has burned down to a deep pile of soft, powdery white ash and a few small, glowing embers. He looks around, thinking someone moved it. But then he looks down into the center of the ash pile. He sees a large, round shape buried in the white powder. It is exactly the size of his basket, but it is completely black and charred. He realizes what happened. Someone knocked it into the fire. The dry grass burned away. His entire day of work, the messy fix, the heavy walk home, it was all completely destroyed in the middle of the night. Lee lets out a long, heavy sigh. It is just another frustrating defeat in a life full of them. He feels totally defeated. He walks over to the woodpile, grabs a long, thick stick, and walks back to the fire pit. He pokes at the buried shape in the ashes, expecting it to just crumble into dust, hoping that maybe some of the seeds survived the fire. He pushes the stick against the charred shape. Chapter 10. The stone shell. Lee stops. That was not the sound of crumbling dirt or soft ash. That was a sharp, hard sound, like hitting a solid rock. He frowns. He uses the stick to carefully push the soft white ash away from the round shape. The woven grass is completely gone. What is left is a smooth, grey and black bowl. It is the exact shape of the inside of his basket. He reaches down, using the thick leather sleeve of his tunic to protect his hand from the heat, and carefully pulls the object out of the ashes. He sets it on the cool stone floor of the cave. It is still smoking slightly. Lee crouches down and looks at it closely. It is the mud he smeared on the inside of the basket yesterday. But it isn't mud anymore. He taps it with his knuckle. It makes a dull, hollow, ringing sound. It is rocker. The intense, sustained heat of the deep coals didn't destroy the clay, it completely transformed it. It baked the soft, wet river earth into a permanent, solid shell of stone. Lee is completely fascinated. He picks it up with both hands. It is heavy, solid, and incredibly smooth on the inside. He has never seen anything like this in his entire life. Everything in his world is made of wood, bone, leather, or woven grass. Stone is something you find, not something you make. But he just made it. He accidentally created a perfectly round, waterproof stone bowl out of nothing but mud and fire. He is holding the very first piece of pottery in the history of the world. Chapter 11. Melting the snow. He holds the hard clay bowl, turning it over in his hands. A very quiet, very profound thought begins to form in his mind. He looks at the tough, fibrous roots sitting near the fire. He thinks about his mother. He thinks about how fire burns food and how water puts out fire. But what if you could put the fire and the water together? He has to test it. He stands up, holding his new stone shell, and walks quickly to the entrance of the cave. He steps out into the freezing morning air. He kneels down in a deep drift of clean, white snow. He uses his hands to pack the hard clay bowl completely full of the freezing snow. Pressing it down tight, he carries the bowl back inside the warm cave. He walks straight to the fire pit. He doesn't set it near the edge this time. He uses a stick to push the hot red coals aside, making a small, flat bed of intense heat. He takes a deep breath, fully expecting the cold bowl to shatter or explode when it hits the heat. He places the clay bowl, full of snow, directly onto the glowing red coals. He steps back and watches. The seconds tick by in the quiet cave. The bowl doesn't crack. It doesn't shatter. The fire-baked clay, born in the intense heat of the embers, handles the fire perfectly. Instead, the snow inside the bowl begins to melt. It turns into clear, cold water. The heat from the coals transfers through the hard clay shell. A few minutes later, tiny bubbles start forming at the bottom of the water. Then, larger bubbles. Soon, the water inside the clay bowl is at a rolling, furious boil. For the first time in human history, water is boiling in a vessel over a fire. Lee stares at it, completely mesmerized. He has just done the impossible. Chapter 12. The soft broth. Lee acts quickly. He grabs a handful of the tough, stringy roots from breakfast. He grabs a piece of rock-hard, frozen meat. He drops them directly into the boiling water inside the clay pot. He sits by the fire and simply watches. He waits for a long time, letting the rolling, bubbling water do its work. The heat and the water are breaking down the tough fibers of the plants and the meat, doing the heavy lifting that human teeth could never do. The cave fills with a completely new, incredibly rich smell. It isn't the smell of burning fat or charring wood. It is the deep, savory, comforting smell of hot broth, when the water has boiled down to a thick, rich stew. Lee uses 2 thick pieces of leather to carefully lift the hot clay pot off the coals. He sets it on the flat stone near his mother's pile of furs. She wakes up to the smell. She sits up, looking confused. Lee points to the steaming clay bowl. He uses a carved piece of wood to scoop out a piece of the root. It is incredibly soft. It almost falls apart on the wood. He hands it to her. She puts it in her mouth. She doesn't have to chew. The hot, soft food simply melts on her tongue. Her eyes go wide. She takes another bite, and then another, drinking the hot, rich broth straight from the edge of the bowl. The warmth of the soup spreads through her freezing body, giving her the deep, easily digestible calories she desperately needs to survive. Lee sits back on his heels, watching her eat. The tight, heavy knot of worry in his stomach finally disappears. He looks at the hard clay bowl, stained with smoke and ash, sitting on the stone floor. He knows exactly how to make another one. He knows they will never have to eat raw, rock-hard food covered in ash ever again. The tension in the cave breaks. The fear of the long winter fades just a little bit, and Lee sits by the fire, listening to the soft crackle of the wood, finally at peace.